protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission to other people and allowing society to get back to normal.
We can kind of almost see the end. We're vaccinating so very fast. Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
Getting vaccinated and getting a booster shot when eligible can save your life and protect you and your family and friends from getting seriously ill and spreading infection.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
We have all the vaccines we need. We just need our people to take it.
You need to know what's in these vaccines, all right? They are just like the things they use for their initiations.
In the early days of the Cold War, the CIA ordered the creation of a secret program intended to find ways of mind control. They funded an army of psychiatric institutions across the United States and Canada to perform experiments on unsuspecting patients using psychedelic drugs, sensory deprivation, electroshock treatments, and more. The program was known by its code name MK Ultra.
It was the most secret program ever conducted by the CIA in the United States. Patients at psychiatric hospitals, prisoners in federal institutions, and even people in the public were given drugs without their awareness or consent and experimented upon.
Some of the most damaging experiments occurred at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. There, under the direction of infamous Scottish-American psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron, unsuspecting patients, many of whom had common ailments such as postpartum depression, were experimented on with aggressive drug cocktails and extreme techniques.
My father, Charles, was a patient of Dr. Cameron's. He had a trigeminal neuralgia, it's called, where there's a pain in the temple that radiates into the jaw that apparently is excruciatingly painful. They told him that it was psychosomatic, which it's not, but in those days, what did they know? So they sent him to a shrink. This shrink that he went to was working with Cameron, although we didn't know. So he put my father right into the program.
I was having trouble with my parents, and my father and my stepmother decided to put me in the Allen Memorial Institute. They had no idea what went on in there. I was 16 when I was there.
Dr. Cameron pursued a concept he called depatterning, which was meant to reduce patients to an infantile psychological state wherein doctors could take advantage of the person's cognitive vulnerability to attempt to rebuild their mind under the doctor's control. A popular method of choice to achieve this was called psychic driving. Another common method was the use of extreme Page Russell electroshock therapy.
Page Russell shock treatment is approximately 40 to 75 times the strength of a normal shock treatment. So it's really designed to wipe out the memory. After 27 days of this, they said that they were discouraged because he still had ties to his former life, in that he was asking to see his wife. They decided to give him more Page Russell shock treatments and put him to sleep for another 30 days.
When patients were released from Allen Memorial, their lives and their families' lives would never be the same again.
Well, there's a lot I could not remember after I got out of the Allen. When my family came, I was a zombie. I didn't even know who they were.
He never came out the same. He had a blank look in his eye. He didn't know who we were.
He had said in his interview with the shrink that I was the apple of his eye. And after he came home, he started beating me not long after.
It was once considered a conspiracy theory during COVID-19 that the mRNA vaccines might alter your mind. Now it turns out that newly circulating declassified CIA documents prove that yes, the CIA actually has been for decades potentially researching how vaccines could be used for mind control.
Now the memo proposes developing long-term covert drugs that could be slipped into daily life. Drugs that were, quote, administered over a considerable period of time, possibly being placed in food or water that caused either agitation or depression. These, quote, should include chemicals or drugs that can be effectively concealed in common items such as food, water, Coca-Cola, beer, liquor, cigarettes, etc., and should also be capable of use in standard medical treatments such as vaccinations and shots.
What they want is total control, but the control is not enough. A change of your personality to the new man, the new person they want to create. They're going to substantially change your life.
They called it protection. They called it responsibility. They called it science. But unknown to millions, the COVID mRNA vaccine is something more.
In 2012, DARPA, which is the research division of the military, started a program. It's called the Adept Protect P3 program, Pandemic Prevention Platform. Look what they proposed. They said, listen, we are going to use gene-encoded vaccines as a new category of preventive measures based on RNA or DNA, and in this approach, we will stop a pandemic within 60 days. Within 60 days, in 2012, this was started. The deception out in the open that this was rapidly developed, that there was all this stunning innovation. The contractors, Moderna got its first multi-million-dollar contract in 2013. This was part of a program. But the military came up with the idea of messenger RNA. It's not Pfizer or Moderna.
Pfizer and Moderna were paid to put their stamps on those vaccines as if they came from the pharmaceutical industry, but that's not what they were doing. They were coming from this was a military project from the beginning.
Yeah, it's sure racketeering. I told you these were criminal acts.
Now, I have said many times, Maria, as you know, that this was a bioweapon because in 2005, at the DARPA MITRE conference, where Ralph Baric made the statement that synthetic coronavirus fragments were, and I'm quoting right off of his CV, biowarfare enabling technology. Maria, I don't know if down under you guys have a problem with the common use of English language, but biowarfare enabling technology sounds to me like it's a bioweapon.
Yes.
In this 4-page letter, complete with footnotes, Brevard County Republicans cite sources which led them to a stunning conclusion. Here it is in their own words. Government agencies, media, and tech companies, and other corporations have committed enormous fraud by claiming COVID-19 injections are safe and effective. Strong and credible evidence has recently been revealed that COVID-19 and COVID-19 injections are biological and technological weapons.
It is synthetic, nanotech,
yes,
and beyond.
The following image was found in a vial under JEM 2100 plus multi-purpose transmission electron microscope.
What you are seeing there, that whole area, the size of a micron, a micrometer, which would be 1,000 nanometers under the electron microscope. This suspicious mesh is what we had to find what it was in the first place. This is what I want you to see. Now I'm going to put the image on the left of the vaccine sample and on the right of the graphene, and you draw your own conclusions. It does look very similar, doesn't it? Now it looks like roughly the same scale, although the indicator on the left says 200 nanometers above the line, and the one on the right says 500 nanometers. The one on the right does look about 2.5 times the one on the left when you look at the line segments. Without any doubt, it is graphene oxide.
The Fifth Column recently published their findings and conclusions on the strange self-assembling nanotech they discovered in the Pfizer mRNA vaccines via optical microscopy analysis. The objects they found in the vaccine correspond with known items in the scientific record, and the conclusion they come to seems quite clear, that the well-documented scientific goal to use nanotechnology in living human beings to form networks capable of controlling several nanomachines is currently being deployed in the COVID-19 vaccines, which amounts to the most intrusive assault against humanity in all of recorded history. And the work shows us that graphene oxide is a key component in all of this. There have been dozens of official documented studies on the use of graphene oxide related to how we see it being used here today. Among other things, as a power converter. Graphene, a one-atom-thick layer of hexagonally arranged carbon atoms, is the thinnest and strongest material known to man, and an outstanding conductor of heat and electricity. It can boost gigahertz frequencies into terahertz, which is exactly what these new nanotech machines need for power. In order to do this, the graphene first needs a frequency to power it, and the optimal frequency to externally power graphene is known to be 26 gigahertz. which is also the frequency put out by 5G.
The mRNA is only an effect or an element of this nanocircuit and nanotech, because it's not possible that spike protein is everywhere in the body after an injection. So it is the transporter oxide graphene. You can put a genome, you can put a parasite, you can put a bacteria, and you can code it, and it mimics the molecule, and they can send this biocode to the oxide graphene. It's a terahertz. It can stock, you probably know that, it can load the data up to terahertz, and it can send it. And so it is like a computer. Bill Gates is perfectly suited, with his engineers to develop this with DARPA. So we know that this can take control of the mind and of the body.
The one thing that makes predicting a little bit of the future easier when you look at biomedical science is that labs are working fairly systematically with overtly stated goals. But the really fun part was that you're taking over somebody else's physical body with the mind of another human. So what do you think would be the next step? You follow medical research, you say you can make a robot move, you can make a human hand move. What would you do next? You say, wow, they're getting brains connected to run things. And you have to begin to think either like doctors or like, security and intelligence people, right? But this technology paired with something called CRISPR, which is like an editing software for genes, makes a number of things immediately available. What he did is he programmed yeast cells to produce anything he wanted. They can produce perfume, they can produce petroleum, they can produce any peptide, anything we program the DNA to do, and it's in the living cell. But you can engineer anything. You can engineer a unique thing that would only kill one person in the world. You can engineer a unique thing that would only kill one person in the world. You can engineer a unique thing that would only kill one person in the world.
Zombie apocalypse. They know that's going to be the outcome. They know it will result in population reduction, and they know what will happen to a whole lot of people. You won't believe that intelligent people will put all that stuff together, yet they do it. And that's what they're giving to children. See, we have to take charge in the spirit. We cannot just close our eyes. We are the ones that the Lord is trusting. All right? And all of heaven is looking at us. I'm telling you, this is very important.
For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds, casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. 2 Corinthians 10 verses 4 and 5.
Wow. Well, welcome to today's program. I hope that you were able to follow the details of what we just showed you. I told you that vaccine was devilish. Devilish. And not just the mRNA vaccine. All vaccines are bad. They are based on a fraudulent theory. It's amazing it's taking this long to deal with this stuff to the extent to which it's been dealt with today. But frankly, from the very beginning, there were voices that spoke against it. At the turn of the 19th century into the 20th, there were voices that spoke against it. But they were marginalized. because those who were interested in eugenics had found an easy way to get into the human body. And there was a warning. And I did bring that warning to you. I showed you that warning in 2020. There was a warning at the time that in the future, a vaccine will be developed by which it will be possible to control the human mind. And it went further to state that not only would they control the human mind, they would be able to drive away, eliminate, eradicate from the mind any thoughts, favorable thoughts about God. That was specifically included in the warning. And I read it to you. It's a long time ago. And most people didn't care to listen to them. The plan has been the same. And they've been working towards it all these many years with this clandestine, fake research that they continue to deliver to nations and governments, insisting they got their people to be vaccinated against some disease which they created. And that's why God's people must be watchful. God's people must be watchful. The scripture tells us, be sober, be vigilant. For your adversary, the devil, walking about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. We're told to be vigilant. Let me show you the contents of many of these vaccines, especially these vaccines that are given to children. You know, by the time you are 18 years old, in several countries, like the United States, the UK, and several others, many around the world, you would have taken between 60 to 72 vaccines. That's what they're doing now. Watch this.
There's boiled pig skin again. Chicken embryo protein, blood from the hearts of cow fetuses, DNA fragments from human fetuses.
Start it from the beginning. I want them to catch it from the beginning. I want you to listen to this man as he reads to you the content of the vaccines. Listen carefully.
There's boiled pig skin again. Chicken embryo protein, blood from the hearts of cow fetuses, DNA fragments from human fetuses, oil extracted from the liver of sharks, and proteins from worm ovaries, and of course DNA fragments from monkey kidneys. There's a famous scene in Macbeth with the three witches are stirring.
Go back and give them proper volume. Listen again to what he's reading to you. This is like witchcraft. I want you to listen. Listen to these items. The very items that native doctors in Africa usually request to make demonic things for you. Watch this.
There's boiled pig skin again. Chicken embryo protein, blood from the hearts of cow fetuses, DNA fragments from human fetuses, oil extracted from the liver of sharks, and proteins from worm ovaries, and of course DNA fragments from monkey kidneys. There's a famous scene in Macbeth with the three witches are stirring the brew. Eye of newt, toe of frog, lizard's leg, tongue of dog. Can't you just picture Gates and Offutt and Hotez stirring that brew? But let's get back to the modern vaccine ingredients. Formaldehyde, God knows you want to inject that into a baby. Polysorbate 80, that's linked to infertility. Potassium chloride, this one is my favorite, potassium chloride, because that is the final ingredient that is given by executioners when they do lethal injections. Swear to God. Now, obviously, the vaccinators use much smaller doses than the executioners, but it does make the point that parents have no effing idea what is in these products.
Did you hear that? Terrible. The murderers. Murderers. And then, why is it that many young people are getting cancers? I talked about this in 2021. Actually, from 2020 into 2021, I explained to you how that these vaccines will cause cancers. And there was something also peculiar about the mRNA vaccines. The vaccinated contaminated the unvaccinated. And I explained that. Strange occurrence, but it happened. And still happens. But watch this report on the rising cancer in young people.
Yeah, well, that Time magazine article acts like it's a mystery that, there's 18-year-olds getting colon cancer, 12-year-olds getting also colorectal cancer, 19-year-olds getting breast cancer. It's not a mystery. There's now over 100 studies showing that the COVID-19 mRNA injections are one of the largest carcinogenic exposures in history. Over 100 studies, and I'll go through a few key ones. 2 population studies were done with over 8.7 million people combined in them. And what they found was they compared the vaccinated populations to the unvaccinated. One was in South Korea, one was in Italy. Both of them found that the mRNA injections and viral vector injections, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, increased the risk of over 7 distinct types of cancer, ranging from colorectal, bladder, breast to thyroid and prostate cancer. And then overall cancer hospitalizations were up there. So we know for sure in the population data, we see the cancer signals, but mechanistically, we recently published the first peer-reviewed evidence of genomic integration of mRNA vaccine genetic material in a stage 4 bladder cancer patient. We found a segment of the DNA plasmid from the manufacturing process in a woman's chromosome 19 in her circulating tumor DNA. So it went from human to Pfizer to human. It was a chimeric non-human hybrid DNA, and this appeared to have induced her turbo cancer. So that's a mechanism. Another one, and we've also published this recently in the World Journal of Experimental Medicine, where we found that the mRNA shots literally turn off tumor suppressor genes, P53 and BRCA.
Wow.
Those genes are essential for cancer surveillance. The shots turn them off, and they turn off thousands of other genes as well. And so it's not looking good.
Terrible. Some time ago, we showed you a video of this sudden death syndrome. And The media has tried to hide that because the paymasters told them to hide them. Take a look at some of those pictures. Again, these ones are even different from the ones we showed you, but the same thing. What was happening to many people and has continued to happen to the vaccinated.
Gordon, you okay?
Oh my gosh.
It's okay, baby. I am not feeling well.
First it starts to get really nice.
What? Montana. What are you doing? Montana.
Think about it. Millions of people have died as a result of those satanic COVID vaccines. And the globalists are still telling you to get vaccinated. It's unthinkable. Now, I remember telling you that they had different batches of these vaccines. They had different batches. And they had the ones that were completely harmless because they knew if all of it was the same, then they'll be caught easily. So break it into different parts. And send different batches. So the fatality levels were different. Now, I talked about that then. Now they've been able to Pfizer and Moderna got caught. Now, the researchers have been able to separate them into their different levels of fatalities. Remember that you were warned. Don't let anybody push you into getting the COVID vaccine. And like I said, they're still there because they've not been brought to book. The culprits are still rampaging in different places and putting pressure on different governments. Of course, their voices are lower today than before, and they can't even enforce these threats anyway. But it's good for the governments that are so terrorized by them to become aware that these people can do nothing. They can do nothing. And indebtedness should no longer be paid because it was a fraud. No country should be paying for vaccines. The vaccines were a fraud. And the parents who are deceived into getting their children vaccinated, watch this pediatrician vaccine misinformation.
What ways specifically do you believe parents are being misled in the pediatrician's office when they try to ask questions?
Pediatricians have all been taught vaccines are safe, effective, necessary, and are harmless. And each one of those statements is false. Vaccines have never been proven to be safe. They don't keep you from getting sick. You can have the vaccine and high antibody levels and still contract the illness. None of them are necessary. There are millions of unvaccinated kids in this country now that aren't sick. They don't have asthma, allergies, eczema, ADD. They don't use inhalers. They don't have chronic daily medications. And every single vaccine causes a level of harm, even if it's just at a cellular level, changing the epigenetics of that child, changing little things, shaving off a few points of their IQ that you may not know about or be able to recognize until later. Vaccines do all of those things.
What is the evidence to support that it's shaving off IQ?
Because you know that every vaccine has an ability to cause encephalitis or to cause brain swelling or cause brain edema, and all of those things lead to lower IQ. And when you have all of those toxicities in your body that your body has to take care of, you know that your body is a little bit less healthy.
Now you can understand why Bill Gates wants every child vaccinated in your country. You see that? And I said something about the Epstein files. What he was planning with Epstein was very telling. Very telling. I told you, you're not dealing with a philanthropist. He's not trying to help the world. Watch this.
On new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. So in the next 5 to 10 years, for the next pandemic, we'll solve all those problems.
You say the next pandemic, there will be another pandemic.
Absolutely. We don't know when. You know, the risk per year, 2%, 3%. So we'll have to prepare for the next one. That, I'd say is, will get attention this time.
Yeah.
The pandemic, sadly, was fairly predictable, and it won't be the last pandemic. The next one could be far more severe. I had predicted there was a risk of a pandemic, and sadly, that came true.
Oh, yeah, prophet. Look at this guy. He planned it and then pretended to predict it. Then when that failed, he predicted a more severe one. He said this one will get attention this time. Anyway, we canceled it. You don't have a chance to do that. Sorry. Continue with the video.
Sadly, was fairly predictable, and it won't be the last pandemic. The next one could be far more severe. I had predicted there was a risk of a pandemic, and sadly, that came true.
The brand new Epstein files show that they may have planned the whole thing from the get-go. These documents prove that the infrastructure needed to profit from a major global pandemic had already been meticulously planned years before COVID-19. It exposes a massive financial system designed around pandemics that was quietly running long before the world ever shut down. Furthermore, it also shows many of the key players who were involved. Through an extensive review of these newly released documents, investigative journalist Sayed G has exposed a hidden network which directly connects Bill Gates, Jeffrey Epstein, and a host of other extremely powerful individuals. It places Epstein front and center, revealing the instrumental role he played in orchestrating the connections, brokering the deals, and guiding the strategic decisions, also that Gates and his friends could plan for future pandemics years ahead of time. So the trail of evidence starts in 2011, with internal emails from JP Morgan Bank showing that Jeffrey Epstein helped design the financial apparatus, which would later go on to secure over $100 million in funding for the Gates Foundation. So in these emails, Epstein was advising the bank's most senior executives on how to pitch a Gates-anchored donor fund, specifically for the purpose of bringing in investment for vaccines. Now, this would of course be masquerading as a charitable project, but was in fact designed to generate massive profits. Indeed, it set up a permanent pipeline where massive amounts of money could flow into vaccine development under the cover of philanthropy. Now, by this time, Bill Gates was already heavily invested in vaccine development, though according to Epstein was terribly frustrated. This was because the Gates Foundation had, quote, already spent billions, yet there was little that could be held up as a great success. And Epstein was right. Gates had already had a long history with vaccine development, dating back to the early 2000s. However, his efforts were already being met with controversy and criticism. This was particularly true regarding the mass distribution of vaccines throughout the Third World, which were later found to cause widespread infertility. It's also true of the grand promises of disease eradication through specialized new vaccines, which in many cases actually made the problem worse. Now, it's also worth noting that Gates himself is on record, proudly proclaiming that vaccines could successfully reduce the global population by a significant amount.
The world today has 6.8 billion people. That's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really great job on new vaccines, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%.
And indeed, it's phrases like this which really make you wonder about his intentions. But when we fast forward just 2 years into the future, this vaccine funding project that him and Epstein were colluding on would finally materialize. So in 2013, the Gates Foundation went on to create a special investment structure, which they called the Global Health Investment Fund. On the face of it, it allowed private investors to inject money into drug and vaccine development for the stated purpose of improving global health. In return, investors would bring in steady returns between 5 and 7%. Nothing too strange there. However, the key difference and what made this unusual was that these investors were offered a 60% guarantee of principal. And what does that mean? It means that private investors would only be risking a maximum of 40% of their original investment, if things didn't go well, of course. The other 60% loss, well, that would be covered by the Gates Foundation and its partners, using philanthropic and public money. Now, in plain words, private investors got to keep most of the profits if things went well, but they were mostly protected from the biggest risks by charity and taxpayer-backed money. And why is this significant? Because this setup basically turned global health issues like pandemics into seriously profitable business opportunities, all with low risk. It means that there was now a real incentive to pump massive funds into these kinds of projects, and it also laid the groundwork for everything that followed later on. However, Epstein's role in this story doesn't end there. Over the years, he continued to expand Gates' influence in the field of pandemic preparedness. Furthermore, the Financial Foundation from 2011 quietly paved way for something much bigger. And with the money pipeline now secured, the next phase was turning those resources into actual global governance. Fast forward just 2 years to 2015, documents show that the Gates Foundation was already in active discussions with several other groups about pandemics and global responses. This was way ahead of any outbreak. Many of those groups overlapped with the International Peace Institute, which in that same year proposed a high-level expert convening in Geneva, and the topic of focus was how to most effectively address and prevent pandemics. Now, although the Gates Foundation publicly declined to fund the event, it went ahead anyway and was hosted by its president, Rod Larson. This meeting involved major groups like the Director General of the World Health Organization, the World Bank, MSF International President, and senior UN and global health officials. Now, it's worth noting that this guy Larson already knew Gates personally. In fact, he'd been dining with him at Jeffrey Epstein's residence just 2 years prior. And so therefore, it's highly possible that they were at least somewhat ideologically aligned by that point. And even after the funding refusal, Epstein managed to keep the personal channel with Larson open. Did this by forwarding Gates' article on pandemic preparedness. And so what this basically shows is that Epstein was acting as a sort of back-channel intermediary. He was trying to spread Gates' influence and help align ideas on pandemics across many different institutions. And so we know that the elite were already aligning on pandemic governance years ahead, but the real shift happened in 2017. This was when the language changed completely. See, in their communications, Epstein and others within Gates' inner circle were now openly discussing pandemics as though they were business opportunities. Pandemics were now treated as a standing category, just like any other investment. Energy, tech, construction. In other words, the concept of a pandemic was no longer seen as a rare disaster. Rather, these were now events that could be predicted, planned for, and potentially manufactured. Resource acquisition. Furthermore, during this time, Epstein was also brokering specialists directly into Gates' office for the specific purpose of simulating pandemics. One example is a text thread from Epstein's phone with an unidentified physician who cites their work experience with the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the Gates Foundation, and the World Bank. This doctor specifically mentions pandemic simulation as a key career credential, and in response to this, Epstein directly recommends to connect with Bill Gates. Now, this shows that these guys weren't merely interested in pandemics as a hypothetical. No, they were investing heavily in actual simulations, like they were preparing for something that they knew was going to happen in the near future. And coincidentally, that same year, the World Bank launched the first ever pandemic emergency financing facility. This was the first of its kind pandemic catastrophe fund, which supplied $320 million in bonds to be sold off to private investors. Of course, it just so happens that coronaviruses were explicitly named as one of the covered risks in those bonds. So the timing here is really quite striking and also very convenient. Now, at the very least, it suggests that these institutions were already planning, at least financially, for a coronavirus-style outbreak, at least 3 years in advance. Now, when you put all of this together, what came next is almost impossible to overlook. In October 2019, just 6 weeks before COVID even appeared, the world saw a full-scale rehearsal, and Event 201 took place. Event 201 was a major pandemic simulation exercise, specifically modeled on a novel coronavirus. It was co-hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, the World Economic Forum, and of course, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And what did they do? Its main focus was looking at how to shape government policy during a viral outbreak, how drug supplies would be distributed, how to shape media coverage, public health messaging, how to handle and limit social media posting, how to force members of the general public to comply with rules and regulations, and how countries would need to work together in a unified response. Now, does this feel like a coincidence to you? Or is something far more deliberate going on? I mean, how is it even possible to rehearse the exact scenario 6 weeks before it even happens? By this time, everything was in place. The money, the simulations, the network, the tech. 6 weeks later, the real thing begins. Now, although these documents are not proof, they don't provide definitive proof, when you factor in all of the other evidence, ranging from the pre-held patents, coronavirus, the mRNA vaccine technology, spike proteins, the millions in dollars of funding going towards gain-of-function research, it really is starting to look like the whole thing might have been planned from the start. This network had already built the financial tools, the policy blueprints, the pandemic simulations, the vaccine patents, the elite connections needed to respond to and profit from a major global outbreak. It involved Epstein, Bill Gates, major financial institutions, many others. The money was there, the rehearsals had happened, the coronaviruses were already flagged. Key players were already aligned years in advance. I mean, this isn't a theory, these are literally documented events. And so, at the very least, this timeline raises extremely serious questions. Now, if, even after all of the accumulated evidence that has come out in the past 5 years that highlights there were some real serious, nefarious players involved, and the narrative that we were fed about COVID was not accurate, even if all of that evidence has not convinced you, then you need to be asking yourself a very simple question. Whenever something like this happens on the world stage, to identify who the culprit really is, you just ask a simple question. Ask yourself who benefits. And if you do that, things become more clear.
Interesting.